Please join me in welcoming on stage Ilian Mihov, Kelsey Robinson, and Oulimata Sarr. Come on, gang. Thank you. Hi, guys. Hello. Thank you so much for joining me. So, Ilian, you are the Dean of INSEAD. Kelsey, you are a partner at McKinsey & Company here in San Francisco. She had the longest commute. And Oulimata, you are the Regional Director for UN Women West and Central Africa. Kind of crazy. All right, so Kelsey, let's start with you. So one of the things that we keep talking about is how, despite our best efforts, women are still lagging behind. So in your opinion, what and where are the pipeline problems?
Yeah, so I spend my time thinking about women in corporate America. So McKinsey and Lean In for the past 4 years have collaborated to release a piece of research every year. And the research intends to shine light on exactly that. So what's the state of women? And it's the largest data set. So I'm a data person, right? So I like to put data behind the conversation. It's the largest data set of its kind. So last year we had 280 companies who employ 13 million people who were part of it. And I think what's challenging about the research every year is the story's actually a little bleak, right? So there's some sobering things that come out of the research. So one sobering statistic is if you looked at the current rate of change, it would take 100 years for us to have equality at the C-suite in terms of representation.
Is that globally?
That's in North America.
In North America?
Yep.
Where we think we're so far ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people point to North America as where we're making progress, where we're breaking glass ceilings, and I think there's great things to celebrate, but there's obviously still a lot of challenges. So that's one stat. I'd say the other thing that we've really learned over the last 4 years is that it starts early, and the challenges start early. So it's not just about executives and the top leadership of our companies, but actually it starts at entry level. So even though women earn over half of bachelor's degrees in North America, they only have 48% of entry-level roles. And if you look at that first promotion, so the first promo from entry, for every 100 men that get that promotion, 79 women and 60 women of color. And so what you see is there are these structural challenges that start from the get-go for women and that are still there.
And I think people don't always realize that they know that there's a problem at the C-suite level.
Yep.
They're not realizing that it's the very first promotion, there's inequality already.
And that's exactly right.
Okay, so Oulimata, tell me about areas where progress is too slow and why is that happening?
I will say that progress is too slow in many areas, most areas. And I will give a bit of history. Some of the women in this room will remember that in 1995, in Beijing, China, there was the largest gathering of women from around the world. And during that meeting, there was a very famous speech from Hillary Clinton in which she said, "Women's rights are human rights." We are celebrating Beijing plus 25 next year. And we are having a panel where we're discussing change. We think change is too slow. And as UN Women, we would like to see more of it, and we believe that it has to be done through a preferential treatment. If I give you data from North America, we were told that only women have access to 1% of public procurement in North America. So in order to close that gap, we need to leapfrog. And we can't wait for it to be voluntary. We would like to see what we call women affirmative procurement. And in Africa, some countries are pioneering that. Kenya is one of the first countries that dedicates 30% of public expenditure to women, youth, and people with disabilities. South Africa gives them a preferential treatment, not a percentage. And my country, Senegal, does the same. We would like to see more of it. We would like to see also a holistic approach. We call them the 3 R's. We believe that to bring about change, you will need to address the issues of rights, women's rights, to health, to education, to opportunities. The second R is representation. We want a seat at the table. We want to be leaders in parliaments, in Senate, in Congresses. We want to be presidents. And the last R is resources. Let's walk the talk. Let's allocate resources to it. And we have a flagship program at the UN that we call gender responsive budgeting, where we are asking government to tell us how many dollars are you spending on women and girls. And in Africa, we have centers of excellence in gender responsive budgeting, such as Rwanda, Morocco, South Africa, and we would like to see more of that.
All right, thank you. So Ilian, with Cyril, we were talking about how there aren't enough female leaders. Do you think education, or the lack of it, is one of the main problems? And just as importantly, how can we attract more women to leadership education?
Well, I think at first women in some countries, as we heard, just need access to education before we're talking about whether they need more or less, but obviously access is not given. What we also observe is that when you look at university level, women and men are 50%, but after that, when you go to MBA classes, then there are fewer women. And we have to ask the question why. Right? There are many different beliefs, there are hypotheses, and very often they're wrong. And especially at INSEAD, where we have 94 nationalities, you look around the world, and from Germany we have only 20% women, from China 60% women. So it varies a lot around the world, and then you have to go deeper and start asking the questions, do studies, experiments, why fewer women are applying from these countries. But to answer this pipeline question, I do believe that we need to have more women coming to business schools, because I think that also for all the questions that we were asking earlier, business has big responsibility going forward. We do, business creates a lot of value out there, but also creates a lot of problems. So having more women in business, I think, is very important. And I don't think that we can fix this issue of having only 5% women at the top CEO jobs if we don't fix it at the MBA level.
Great, thank you. Note to self, go to business school. Oulimata, let's talk about drivers of change. We know that women's economic empowerment boosts global development. It's not just about a salary, it's that the whole community thrives when women thrive. Let's personalize this. In your experience, can you talk about some specific examples where this works?
I would like to share the example of the Sahel. The Sahel region in West Africa is the epicenter of violent extremism and climate change. And we strongly believe at UN Women that the biggest threat to peace is poverty. One of our flagship programs in the Sahel is called Women Economic Empowerment through Climate Resilient Agriculture. As most of the labor force in the Sahel region, from Senegal to Chad, Mali, Niger, is actually women. And the climate change, climate smart agriculture is trying to address 5 main issues. And those issues are valid on many, many areas. One issue we're trying to tackle is the issue of policy. And in policy, you have the major issue of access to land and how can we transform legislation so women can own land. The second issue we're addressing is the issue of skills and capacity. If you're talking about agriculture, how do we help the women farmers produce more, produce at scale by using climate resilient technology, renewable energy, better management of water. The third pillar of that flagship is access to finance. And women are tired of the ghetto of microfinance. It will definitely, thank you, the women in the room. We would like to see a full spectrum of financial instruments to support their activities, whether it's a credit line, a guarantee fund, angel funding, private equity for some of the entrepreneurs, leasing of equipment. So access to finance beyond microfinance. The fourth area is access to markets. So if I help you produce more, whether it's rice, fonio, a baobab, and you own the land and you have the financial instrument that's adequate, how do I take you to market? And finally, basic infrastructure, storage, whatever. And we realize that it's a holistic approach that brings about change. If you want to bring about change in the C-suite, if you want to break that glass ceiling, that broken ladder, those sticky floors, as we call them, you will need to have a holistic approach. That holistic approach will also require men. I want to talk about that. For the longest time, the women have been doing their advocacy alone.
True.
We used to toy and make noise to have a seat at the table. We realized that to be able to have a catalytic change, we need men. We need the he for she. We need the men champions who will say, I support my wife, I support my sister, I support my daughter. And Cyril, by the way, is one of those he for she. He's wearing his pin today. So those are the men that are walking the talk, and we would like to see more of those men to walk alongside with us.
Great, thank you. So, yes. So, Ilian, we know that there are more opportunities for women in social entrepreneurship. Why do you think that is? And do you think that women have a different approach to social entrepreneurship, or is it something else entirely?
I don't know actually the answer to this question. I must admit from the beginning.
We'll try.
I think that we see more and more women going into entrepreneurship, which is great. We're still very far behind. I think that, to me, the way that I think about social entrepreneurship is that first, let me tell something that we're doing at INSEAD because I think it is relevant. We started an Institute for Business and Society in order to address all these issues that create tensions between business and society, whether it's sustainability or whether it is ethics or whether it is gender equality, wealth inequality, and so on. And the way that we want to deal with this is to change norms. Norms are difficult to change, so it's a very ambitious goal, but we want our alumni, our students, when they graduate, when they start managing companies, when they start leading companies, in the process of value creation for their company, also to think, what is the value that I create for society and for the environment? Now, social entrepreneurs start from the other end. What is the biggest problem today in society and in the environment, and how can I create a sustainable, from financial point of view, business that can address these issues? Now, these two models have to meet, and possibly women are more involved in social entrepreneurship. We know that actually women create more social entrepreneurship enterprises when there are women in the business community leaders. So that's a study at INSEAD that we have done. It is very important that actually you have the role model. And in fact, I do believe that there might be more role models in social entrepreneurship then attract more women, and that could be snowballing. But I think that in general, it's just the strive to create something new, the creativity is leading women, but also men into these areas.
All right, thank you. So, Kelsey, let's talk about the need for more women in the workplace and in the world of business. Can you give us some examples of how businesses thrive when women are involved at the highest levels?
Absolutely.
I bet you have some data for us.
We could have actually started the conversation there too, right? Like I think we're here and we kind of take for granted maybe this audience is invested in equality, right? And the way I like to think about it is there's a couple different dimensions and reasons that you believe in equality. Corporate America, more broadly than that. So there's fairness. I don't think anyone here is going to debate that today, right? There's a talent argument, and then there is an economic impact or a business impact argument. And I think when you think about corporations, the latter two, assume one is there, and the latter two are incredibly important, right? So when it comes to talent, if you look at the pipeline of talent, we've talked about it a couple of times already, and the incredibly educated pool of women who are ready to contribute, it's a talent strategy gap if you're not actually figuring out how do I attract and retain that talent, right? So I think, and you would think about it that way if you thought about it, in a functional lens, like how do I get the right marketing people versus financial people, right? And then I think there's the question of business and economic impact, and I think that's been studied through and through. right? And so many examples of the fact that whether it's diverse boards, diverse companies, right? If you look at diverse companies, they're somewhere between 15 and 20%. If you look at gender equity, more likely to outperform their peers. And that goes to about a third when you're talking about ethnically diverse companies, right? So I think the facts are there, right? But yeah, I think there's a couple different lenses for how companies should be thinking about the why. And I think the challenge is actually now, how do you move past that? And it seems to me that there's a lot of good intention, a lot of ideas around this being a priority, but then perhaps not enough action behind that to really push for progress.
Okay, thank you. So Ilian, let's talk about entrepreneurial skills. What entrepreneurial skills do women need to develop and capitalize on?
Again, I think that the skills for men and for women are the same. What I think is different is that the resources, the capacity, that the access that women have is probably different. Is actually different. We saw in the data. The access, as you said, only 0.5% of the third round of the C round funding is going to female entrepreneurs. We see also that the lack of network is very important. That's why this event is so important in these awards, because they create a living network. And network, at the end of the day, when you have an entrepreneurial venture, just the idea is not sufficient. Just the skills, the knowledge is not sufficient. You need much more. You need the ideas to be bounced, you should be bouncing off with other people. You need the financial resources and so on. So I think that this is the bigger issue. And I think that I cannot overemphasize one very important thing, and that is, to me, it is the role models. Again, we did a study at INSEAD looking at women in Latin America, I think it was in Peru, asking the question, why fewer women sign up for tech courses, so like coding, programming, and so on. We did a study, 2 different samples. One set of women was sent an email with the course description and just the fees and everything. The other set received the same email plus a story about the role model. So again, the storytelling is important. The second group had twice higher signing up than the first one. I think that this is what is very important. I think that also what is very important is in this process to recognize, in the entrepreneurship process, to recognize our own biases. Because we all have biases and we're not aware, and even the well-intentioned ones have biases. So last year I told this story to the same audience, well, different audience, same event. I want to continue with it, to repeat it now and continue, because I think that it tells us what sometimes we're missing. So last year, in 2018, in January, I appointed our Dean of Faculty, which is the first woman at INSEAD Dean of Faculty. But before that, 6 months before that, I was hesitating because, INSEAD is a tough place and we have some very aggressive professors, maybe not only at INSEAD, male professors. And it was, well-intentioned worry that, they'll go to her. The Dean of Faculty has the most difficult job because, there are 150 faculty members. Everybody is outperforming and underpaid. So you have to deal with all them. And then I was wondering, I'll put her in this position and she will suffer. Because I was Dean of Faculty before that. It's much more difficult than being a Dean. Dean, you have these great events, meet great people and so on. Dean of Faculty is very, very difficult. Last year I said after 4 months I can tell you that she's the best Dean of Faculty that the school has ever had. This year I would say something more. This year I would say that we had a very difficult year internally at the school. We had to make some very difficult decisions. We continue to make some very difficult decisions. I must say I would not have made these decisions without her. And looking back, I'm at a hindsight, what we made when we made this decision, the difficult one, today, it is obvious it was the right decision. But without her, I would not have made it. So I think that thinking about these biases, and then when we look at entrepreneurial women, trying to figure out where we're not hindering them with these biases is very important.
Thank you. Oulimata, you and I have spoken quite a bit about policy. So how can policy contribute to the effort of providing education that is relevant for women leaders and entrepreneurs?
Yes, you're right. We talked about it. I think policy is important because it allows us to close the gap It forces people to do something that they don't want to do. And I'll give you a very simple policy that now is helping Africa lead the way, and that is the parity law in parliament. In Senegal, there's a law that says that, if you are a political party and you want to be on the ballot, you have to have a list that is 50-50. And today we are very proud to have a balanced parliament, and the midterm review of that representation of women in parliament show that they propose more laws, they attend more sessions, and they contribute the most. And then yet when they were going, people were terrified at the idea of having 50% of women in parliament, and do they understand the issues, and can they take the lead? And the women of Senegal are showing that they are as capable as any other women. If we talk about, business, I mentioned it earlier on, same thing. We would like to see corporate show their figures. Can corporate America, can businesses around the world tell us how many women own businesses are giving you, are providing you with goods and services? That disclosure will change the world, because then they will realize that they give us very little business. A country like Iceland, through policy, is making illegal gender pay gap. We don't want to wait 170 years to close that gap. We want to be paid equally. Before joining the UN, I was working for a development bank, and same thing, when they did the audit, all the women at equal grade were less paid than the men. And you need policy to bring about, catalytic change.
Thank you. So Kelsey, you and I have spoken about the fact that women are doing their part in so many ways. We're showing up, we're taking initiative, we're asking for promotion and raises, but that's only half the battle. What can businesses do to equip women to lead?
Yeah, so there's an interesting gap between what companies say and what employees see. And so when we ask the companies in our research, most of them say we are, gender and racial diversity is a top priority. When you ask the employees, about half of them agree that it's a priority, and agree that their companies are doing what they need to make change or to drive change. And 20% of employees actually say, it's actually just lip service, just a pretty dramatic statement, right? And so I think this is where I was going a little bit with, there's intention, right? So companies acknowledge it, it's a priority, but then the question is, what do you do and what should companies do about it? And I think what's frustrating for corporations is there is no silver bullet, there is no one answer, and that's why this is all so hard. But there are really concrete things they can do differently. So some of those things would include, I always say it's treating it like a business problem. So if you were to develop a new product and go to launch it in a new country, you would do a couple things, right? You would set targets and have a goal. You would actually track your progress, back to the point around whether or not you make that public, at least tracking it for yourselves, right? Then you would also hold some executives accountable, right? So I don't know a single company that would launch a new product without saying, executive, A and B, you're responsible, and if the progress or the lack of success of this product's up to you, right? So I think there's this big element of treating it like any other business problem, because we talked about that, it is a business problem. I think in addition to that, there's some actions they can take around just making hiring and promotions more equitable. So taking bias out of hiring, requiring diverse slates when you hire people or when you're looking at internal promotions. There's a third point around how do you think about the culture you're creating? So how do you actually create a respectful and inclusive culture? How do you make sure, we have this concept of the only in our research. So how do you make sure that women aren't feeling like they are the only one in the room, and that when they are, the culture's respectful, and when it's not, there's a swift consequences, right, for when it's not. And then I'd say lastly, we touched on it in the last panel, but finding a way to fit work and life together, right? So, there's concept that's kind of more in conversation now around this concept of a dual career couple. I'm in one, right? I have a husband that works full-time very much, and I have a son. And what we see in the research is that senior women are 2 times more likely to be in that situation, right? And so if we want to actually help them be successful, we need to help them with, leave policies. We need to help them figure out how can they have more flexible lives. And I think what's great about that last bucket of actions is it benefits men too, right? That's not a one-sided conversation. That helps men with families as well. So those are a couple actions that I think companies are starting to take, but you really have to take an integrated approach. They've got to do all of it.
All of the above.
All of the above, exactly.
So, Oulimata, one of the biggest hurdles that women face to start a business is a lack of access to finance. How do we help them have equal access to finance opportunities?
I'll share a story with you to illustrate that. Christine Lagarde, who's heading the International Monetary Fund, visited Senegal some 3 years back and wanted to meet women entrepreneurs. The ecosystem of women entrepreneurs were present. And during that conversation, women complained bitterly about access to finance and, being kept small. And I think when she left the meeting, she said, "And what are you going to do about it?" In Senegal, the women started a women investment club. So 80 women, I participated in that, put on the table $10,000 each. And we raised $1 million to be able to finance women-owned businesses. So we decided to be agents of change and drivers of progress, to provide, patient capital to women businesses. And the story was inspiring enough for our sisters in Côte d'Ivoire to launch their Women Investment Club. The women of Morocco reached out to say, "How did you do it? Can you share your experience?" So I will end by saying, we can be the change we want to see. We don't want to be on the receiving end of help. We can make the change, and I know that Niges from Ethiopia is in the room, and in Ethiopia they started a women's bank. They were tired of waiting for financing to get to them, so they put the capital together. They're very successful, and then it ended up being a ripple effect with women of Kenya and women of Tanzania also starting their women's bank.
So our last question, we're almost out of time, but we have enough time for one last question for you, Kelsey. How can the private sector make gender diversity a business priority? And what are the best practices to help women access equal opportunity in the workplace? Small topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Short period of time.
So all of the above, like I was mentioning before, so I touched on a couple of them. I think one thing that we haven't really talked about as much is also the role of men, right? And I think we mentioned a little bit, it came up in the past panel. I think when we look at the research, what's interesting is we asked men and women, how involved are men in initiatives that are trying to promote gender equality? And women, 1 in 5 women felt that they were involved, and actually only 1 in 3 men thought that they were involved, right? So they were both basically acknowledging they're not actually at the table, right? Or 20% of the time they are. And if you look at the pipeline, I think they showed it up on the screen, 3/4 or more of like the very top leadership of these companies are men. And so I think we talk about role models and we talk about storytelling, and I think that's very, very powerful. But I think the opportunity creators and the people in corporations who have the most opportunities to create are men. And so we absolutely have to get them involved, and we need them to be sponsors, right? So we talk about the difference between having a mentor, someone you go to lunch with to get some advice, and having a real sponsor, so someone who helps you navigate politics, supports you when someone questions your ideas, right? And men have to be those sponsors for women. And what you see is when women have those sponsors, they're much more likely to aspire for greater things.
Thank you. All right, well, thank you all for this wonderful conversation. It was the perfect kickoff before we get to hear the stories of our 21 finalists. So if you will join me off stage, thank you all.